Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, staying connected is crucial. You can depend on the Cross Insurance family
Very good.
to provide the best insurance solutions for you. We've got your team protected. Visit crossagency.com today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tiana Woodard. I'm a Boston Globe reporter, and I'm super lucky today to be your moderator for today's discussion of Storming Caesar's Palace. And to discuss this documentary, we have Hazel Gerland-Pooler and Sandra Phillips Gilbert. So just a quick snapshot of bio of these amazing women. So first, our filmmaker, Hazel Gerland-Pooler, is a Colombian-born, NYC-based director, producer, and documentary filmmaker. She directed 10 episodes of PBS's Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr. and co-produced the 6-hour The African Americans, Many Rivers Across, also with Gates Jr., which won Emmy, Peabody, DuPont Columbia, and NAACP Image Awards. So pretty much the films of my childhood and my education. So I'm kind of fangirling a little bit. And then Storming Caesar's Palace, which is her first feature-length documentary, is going to broadcast tonight on PBS Independent Lens starting at 10 p.m. And then we also have Ms. Sandra Phillips Gilbert, who is a current social services representative at the Department of Human Services and Economic Security Administration in DC, and a former advisory neighborhood commissioner who represented the Rosedale community in Ward 6 for 10 years. And she's also the daughter of Mrs. Ruby Duncan, the subject of Storming Caesar's Palace, and continues the work every day of fighting for equity and improving the quality of life for our neighbors and community members. Thank you both so much for being here and devoting an hour of your time, or 45 minutes rather. I'm so excited to hear from you. And then just a few housekeeping items for our attendees. We're gonna devote the last 15 minutes to your audience questions, and the first 30 minutes or so are gonna be our moderated discussion. If you have any questions along the way, you can submit them using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And also, this panel is being recorded, so just that's your first and last warning for that, but that also means it's going to be available for viewing after today's event. So with all that being said, let's hop right in. And I guess I just wanted to start with Hazel. I was curious to know, why did you want to tell this story? And I was curious to know, why this story that you wanted to share.
Well, first, let me just say thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure, and so excited to be able to share the film with everybody. And yeah, we're excited about our broadcast tonight, also on PBS. So why did I first start making this film? Well, it's been a very long journey. I've started working on this about 15 years ago now, which is sort of crazy, but awesome at the same time. I came to the project in a couple different ways. As an adoptee myself, so I was born in Bogota in Colombia. I was put up for adoption by a girl who was 16 years old. And so for me, I feel like I have been privileged and lucky enough to be adopted by another family, which gave me lots of educational opportunities. And so for me, it really feels like not only a responsibility, but a real personal passion for me to be able to uplift the stories of women, mothers who are fighting for their children and who are able to make a difference in their lives. Such as Ms. Ruby Duncan, who obviously did everything she could to feed and house and clothe and take care of her family, and then that of her community, and even by extension, all of us in the US. So for me, yeah, that personal, real passion for feeling like I want to be able to share and uplift those stories. I also came to the story through a book. It was called Storming Caesar's Palace. It was written by Annalise Orlek, who's a Dartmouth professor. And I just thought this should be a documentary. This is incredible. And so I set off to Vegas after reading the book and introduced myself to Miss Duncan and the other mothers, Mary Wesley and Elversa Beals, and some of the other moms who don't end up appearing in the film as well. And it's just been, yeah, since then, really earning their trust and working with the community to be able to share the story.
Thank you so much for sharing. And then also, like probably an easy question is, Sandra, I was curious to know, how's Miss Ruby doing? Oh, you're
You're
still
muted.
muted.
She's doing great. She's so excited. She's 90 years old
So
and
beautiful.
she's feisty and ready to go. You know, she's pushing, get out to vote. You guys just come together. Let's do something about what is happening today. We got to fight for children, families, seniors, everybody across the board. And I'm just so happy my mother is able to see this. You know, she's seeing her flowers, getting her flowers now, and she's still everyone is calling her, and she's just so excited about what's happening.
That's
Yeah.
so beautiful to hear. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Her like flowers are long overdue, but I'm glad that she's getting them, you know. And also just so beautiful to see her like so vibrant and so lovely and just so vivacious, like so long in her life. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And one thing that like Sandra just said that I guess maybe is posed to both of you, like one thing that I was thinking when I first saw this, I was just like so taken aback by this history, but also like I felt a little betrayed by not learning this so early. Like this was watching this is the first time I had even learned about more about the anti-poverty movement, welfare rights, and this is something that I wasn't taught in school. And then I had even like visited Caesar's Palace last year as a part of like the annual Black Journalist Convention, and I didn't know of any of this history around that building and all this stuff. And I was just like, why didn't I know about this more? And I guess like maybe more for Hazel, like was that kind of a reason that propelled you in doing this? And then also, Sandra, like, do you feel that that not enough people know about your mother's story and her legacy? Whoever wants to start.
Well, I can start out if that's okay. I can just to say that, yeah, I mean, it was astonishing to me that, you know, Ruby Duncan's story is not told and not really heard of. And it's sort of seemed like kind of a footnote in history. And, you know, we hear about some of the main male leaders in the civil rights movement, but we don't really hear about that many women who were, you know, leading the charge. And as a woman of color myself, I felt like working on documentaries over the years, why aren't we sharing more of our own stories? Why aren't they out there? And I think it's so important now in particular, as so many politicians and other people are trying to take away our history and start saying, well, we're not going to tell that story. That won't be in the history book. And it wasn't in the history book before. It definitely won't be now. And so it really, really is, I think, a fight for history, that American history, you know, Black history, women's history, that is American history. And I think it's so crucial that everyone have access to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I would say the same thing Hazel was saying, but the fact a lot of people are asking me, we didn't know about Ruby Duncan. We didn't know this happened. And someone was saying, I'm just so embarrassed, I didn't know. Well, you know, I tell them, you don't have to feel embarrassed. The thing is that you have to learn, you have to get out there, you have to see what needs to be done in your community. And this is, I'm just so grateful that Hazel took the time to focus on these women. And so the story will continue to get out there. And so this is why it's important that we don't allow political representatives to hide or to present policy and laws that prevent people from knowing about their history. And so this is important. I call this movie, this documentary, a movement within a movement, because people are finding that they're just inspired, that they want to see more Ruby Duncans, that they can be a Ruby Duncan, men and women. And so this is important, and we need to know stories about little people, the people that you don't hear. And that energizes people throughout communities, that if Miss Ruby can do it, I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would like say that Miss Ruby is like larger than life, and there's so many other like Miss Ruby Duncans that whose stories like aren't being told. And I'm glad to see this kind of like reversing that narrative. And I was curious to know, like, if kind of as a follow up to that, Miss Sandra, like over the years, had other like people, whether it's filmmakers or reporters, like approached your family to know more about this story, and or even if so, or if not, like how has Hazel like stood out in telling the story of your family? And yeah, I'm curious to know that.
My mother has been approached by tons of reporters.
Mhm.
People have been so interested in her life, but never a filmmaker. And as I got to know Hazel, I said, I talked with my mother. We had a long talk, and she wanted to make sure she was in good hands, that she wasn't talking to somebody that wanted to take advantage of her,
Mhm.
or, because that happens a lot in the Black community, whether you're an athlete, an artist, or whatever. And Hazel came right in and she talked, we talked, the family got to know her, and she's now one of her adopted daughters. So Hazel calls mama, mama, and we love it. We love Hazel. We feel connected. Hazel is just, she's the friend, the advisor, the person that poses questions to make you think, and she's the advocate. And that is what my mother feels. My mother feels safe and secure. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I believe in the work that she's done. And I want to make sure that the women, the courageous women, as well as my mother, I'm carrying this legacy, so I have to do it. It's my responsibility as a daughter, as a community member, as a human being to do something. We all have a responsibility. So that's why I'm here today, and how much I really appreciate Hazel.
Thank you.
Hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo some of that, it was really important for me from the very beginning to make sure that, Ruby and her family felt, and the larger community really felt as though I was, an ally, an advocate, and someone who really wanted to tell all of the story, and share their lives and experiences with as much sort of accuracy and sensitivity as possible, and just really did not want to be, some kind of a reporter who just sort of parachutes into a neighborhood and then, extractively wanders off with a story, and then, all of these negative things that is kind of part of the colonial journalism, which I really do not want to be a part of and am not a part of. And so it was very important for me that this whole time, I shared cuts with them. I, wanted them to see what I was doing so that they could weigh in and say, well, no, that's not me, or yes, this is me. And this is so exciting. And so it was very collaborative in that way.
Yes.
Yeah, and Hazel, I was curious. So I know, just to make sure, this is your first feature-length documentary, right?
It is, yes.
And congratulations on that. I was wondering, what would you say, like, was there a challenge or anything that you had to overcome working on this that other like previous like projects you worked on didn't present to you? Was there anything new, or what was the biggest challenge for this one?
I mean, I think there are a couple big challenges. This is different because I'm directing it and producing it myself, and therefore also funding it myself. And so, when I've worked on other projects with Dr. Gates, or done research for, Stanley Nelson, or worked on other people's documentary projects, there's already an infrastructure in place at the production company. They're already well-known, people who are like sort of the face of the project. So in this case, it was me knocking on doors, essentially saying, hey, who wants to fund this documentary about Ms. Ruby Duncan and the, all the other mothers of the National Welfare Rights Organization. And it was really a struggle for a long time. That's part of what took the film so long to produce, was really fundraising, because, poverty, anti-poverty, history even are sometimes not, super high on the list of funders. People don't think people care about that. But I think I always said, you know, they would say, why is this relevant today? Why should we care about like poor Black moms in the 60s and 70s? And I said, well, for a number of reasons. Like, first of all, this is all still happening now. And by looking at the past, it might be a little easier to be able to say this is wrong, or these are solutions that we can, you know, try this time that we didn't do last time. So yeah, I feel like it was just, for me, it was relevant the whole time, but it was hard to convince some of the gatekeepers. But ultimately, I have to say, we did have a lot of support from fantastic supporters like the Ford Foundation and ITVS and the National Endowment for the Humanities and so many others. So, and Firelight Media was fantastic. So, I mean, ultimately it went really well, but it took a little while. And I think actually COVID helped pull back the curtain on that inequality that was happening, economic inequality and the large sort of, you know, economic disparities in this country. And also it helped, I think, regular people realize that they might actually need the safety net. I think sometimes people are like, well, I'm not gonna need to go on welfare. I don't need this, that, or the other. But the reality is, so many people during COVID were like, oh, I do need a stimulus check. Oh, I do need food security help because I'm now unemployed and all of my business is shut down and all these things. And so it suddenly people were like, oh my God, like I actually do need to pay attention to this. And I think that was something that really helped stimulate attention and towards this project as well. So.
Yeah, and before I get into the next question, just a reminder for our attendees, if about the 5:30 mark, we're going to get into attendee questions. So if there's anything you want to ask both for our panelists, feel free to drop that in the Q&A feature at the bottom. And then Sandra, I think Hazel kind of touched on this, is one thing I was hoping to ask. I think when watching this, and probably many other like viewers would agree, like I was astounded by like how far we've come in terms of this work, but also how much hasn't changed since like Ms. Ruby Duncan and so many of those other people like dove into that work. As someone who's deep in this, like what do you feel that we've progressed in, and then what still needs work or what hasn't changed so much?
The only thing that has changed is the years. Yeah, everything else has stayed the same, you know, the style, the fashions, all that has changed. But the saddest thing is that it's worse. And now in 2023, we're being attacked across the board. Women's reproductive rights, the right to to educate our children and to allow them to learn about their history and others to learn. I mean, everything, seniors. I mean, it's scary. And I think we've gotten so comfortable. I call it the iPhone generation. You know, we can identify, but, you know, we're okay. So, yeah, I'm sorry about what happened. And this is why I say this film, this documentary is a movement within a movement, because it will allow people today, no matter how old or how young, we have to get involved. If you're in your community and you see something's wrong, get involved. Go to those community meetings. You know, turn on the news, see what needs to get on, you know, Google stuff, find out what you can do, find your interests. And so what we're lacking is people who feel they don't have the power. A lot of people don't feel they're powerful. And one lady, after watching the screening in South Carolina, she said, it's only 4 of us in my family. I don't have much. I know somebody I can call. I said, then that's your job. That's what you got to do, because whoever you call may be the person that will add to what needs to be done. Everybody has a responsibility, and no matter how big or small you give, it makes a difference. So, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like one of the things for me about this film that I want people to take away is kind of Ruby's mantra, you know, we can do it and do it better. And the idea that like everyone is an expert on their own experience and their own lives. And so you don't need, you know, a policymaker or politician to say, you know, this is how much you should get or what should happen to your life, especially when they don't know how much diapers and eggs and everything else costs, right? So it feels like really what we need is people to be able to say, I am empowered. This is my life. I know what's best for me and for my family, and I can make a difference. One of the things that in the film as well is just that we can see if, you know, one person gets together with another person in their community, you know, any injustice is felt, you can make a difference. You can come together. It can be something small. It can be ultimately, you know, something big, you know, lobbying your state legislature for food stamps, for example, or anything that happened, you know, like was in the film. But just to say, I feel like my goal with the film is just to empower people and to have people realize that they are the experts and they can make a change if they want to.
Yeah, another quote I think that I was thinking out like about as I watched the film, I know that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who represents like much of Greater Boston in our district, like one thing that she says a lot is that those who are like closest to the pain should be closest to the power. So like in other words, being closest to those policies or those decision-making processes. And
So true.
right. And I think that's something that was a through line I saw throughout, and just like Miss Duncan and so many others, like taking that literally and using their own experiences to inform it rather than just having like these other people who have never like walked a day in their shoes doing it. And I think that's a really powerful message. I'm so glad that you both brought that up. To both of you, like one thing that I was wondering through, like, I guess whether it was like Hazel working on this or like Sandra reviewing this or being a part of this process, was there something that I guess like you guys like learned or that you may not have really like something that you learned, whether it's from the other people that were included or something you maybe had not thought about as much that you took away from this process?
Yeah, that's a. Oh, I think I'll let Hazel go on that.
Okay, I can start. I think one of the things that I learned, and I sort of knew that, you know, women have always been the backbone of movements, the civil rights movement in particular. But what I didn't realize was how much the women of the National Welfare Rights Organization pushed Dr. King to really have a poor people's movement. I think that's something that a lot of people don't really realize, that you know, he didn't kind of come up with that idea on his own, that it really was these women who, you know, pushed to have him come and meet with them, and Dr. Abernathy as well joined with them. And I think it really, you know, helped to propel the poor people's movement. And we can still see that we have that legacy today with the poor people's movement being led by Reverend Barber and Dr. Theo Harris. So there's like still, you know, a movement for a moral revival that is still going on, and still poor people's movement. And it's just amazing to me that, you know, these women really started that. I didn't know that before.
Well, I can say in our day and time, with all types of way of communicating, people are still unable to learn and find out things that are impacting them. And you know, I don't know the answer, but I believe the way my mother and him did it was they met all the time. They did what they did is they got to know their community, and everybody was like block captains. There were people that went throughout the community that knew people, and they would educate them, inform, find out what was the problem, what was going on, what were issues, what were their ideas. They brought it back to the group, and they invited other groups, other diverse groups, and they worked on the problem. They decided this is how we're going to attack this issue. This is how we're going to all come in to work on this. Because when they did the March on the Strip, they had all types of student organizations, different diverse organizations and groups working. So I think we have to go back to the fundamentals of talking to people. We cannot assume because you're on social media that you're receiving the same information or you are hearing the same information. I'll send something that's shocking to me to another friend. They're like, well, when did this happen? And so we have to start at that grassroots and target the community to break it down where they understand. We cannot assume everybody understands things or know what's going on. So that's what I'm finding, that with all of this social media, we're still at a loss.
Right.
But we have so much power if everybody was on board or knew about it, things that they could do.
And it's so incredible when you think about the work that these women were able to accomplish, given that there was no social media, right? They had no internet. They didn't have cell phones. They didn't have ways of communicating like across the country quickly. I mean, I guess there were telegrams and things like that, but I don't think that happened all that often. And it's just so amazing how, you know, visionary these women really were, and how politically and media savvy they were as well, given how different the media landscape in some ways was back then. But they knew, you know, sorry, there's a motorcycle outside. But they were like, you know, realize, let's call the press. If we have celebrities show up, we will also get more press coverage, and that will help us. So there was a lot of media savvy that I think is kind of impressive also, that these, you know, moms had and were able to really utilize when they needed it.
And I want to add that another thing I noticed is that these women were courageous, fearless. They got arrested so many times, they can't even remember how many times. They went out, they put their lives on the line for their children, for their beliefs. And today, a lot of people are afraid. People are scared. These women were fearless. And so that's the big thing I noticed in the film. That, I mean, as a child, I saw my mother getting arrested numerous times and being manhandled. I was so scared, but I'm looking at this film and she's smiling. you know, it was scary, but it was the fact that they were brave. And I admired that about them, that quality now. And we need brave people now. We need people to not be afraid to stand up.
And then I had a question for Hazel, like what parts didn't make it into the film, or what were some things that were really hard to cut out? I'm curious to know.
That's a good question. This film, you know, could have been like 20 hours long, but I had to, trim stuff out for different reasons. Sometimes I knew about an incident or something that had happened, but there was no footage for it. If someone's not there with a camera or something like that, then it's really hard in a historical documentary to be able to share that scene. And, you know, you can be creative, you can use audio or use other things, but I really, as much as possible, was trying to keep it moving and have it, you know, use all of this fantastic archival footage and photos that we found. So things that got left on the cutting room floor. There was one scene that I really wanted to include about Ruby's experience with the Culinary Workers Union. So she, as a hotel worker in the 60s, had to join the Culinary Workers Union. And it was a place where she really learned, I think, a lot about kind of racial solidarity and the idea that one can, if you come together as a group, you can then, you know, really bargain, like collective bargaining for what you need. So she had been working in the Flamingo Hotel, and this kind of like rude housekeeper, like head of housekeeping person was sort of like, well, you need to come and you need to stay late, and we have a whole, you know, junket of people coming in, you have to do all these rooms. And she was like, no, I've been here, I've already worked an 8-hour day, it's time for me to go home to my family. And she got fired. But because she was a member of the union came back and said, you have to reinstate Ruby. You can't be fired for that. You have to give someone notice if they're going to stay, need to be on the job for longer, and she would get overtime. There are various things that, like, you know,
Yeah.
she coming out of being, you know, the child of sharecroppers, growing up in the South in Louisiana, kind of Jim Crow South, like that kind of being able to say no, and I want this, that, or the other, and I have a right to that, I think was something that was, you know, not, I mean, she may have inherently known that, but didn't know that she could actually ask for those things and be heard in a place of business. And so I think that was a scene that I would have really liked to include, because I think it's important for us to recognize the place of unions, particularly now, when we see collective bargaining and workers, you know, trying to fight for their rights, whether it's, you know, a higher minimum wage or different hours or, you know, parental leave, or all these different things that are still issues today. I think, yeah, the roots of that kind of organizing can be found in the unions. I wish I'd been able to include that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe it's another film, not to.
Yes, another
Um, yeah, so
Or series.
Yeah, series, exactly. I like the way you're thinking, Sandra.
okay, so I know it's about 5:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and get to some of the questions that have been submitted. The first one is from Alexis and Norma. They're asking Hazel, is there an organization that people can support that enables independent filmmakers to make movies like Storming Caesar's Palace?
That's a good question. I received funding from Firelight Media. They are a place that try to support filmmakers of color. It's not all necessarily like long form documentaries like mine was, but that's a place that, you know, there's lots of other nonprofits too. I think the IDA is the Independent Documentary Association. I also got funding from them. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I should find out. So I have a better answer for you, but those are definitely a couple places. Sometimes Women Make Movies, who is my educational distributor, they act as a fiscal sponsor. And so if there's a particular film that you're interested in, you can see it. So they, on their website, I think, have films that are kind of in production or even in development. And so you can look there, and if you're like, oh, that's a film that looks interesting, you can give a donation there, and I think it's tax deductible. So
Good to know.
all ideas. Thank you for asking. It's a good idea. I wish more people thought that way.
And then the next, it's kind of like a comment. I think it's food for thought that is really interesting. It's from Rebecca. It said, Rebecca said that we seem to be going backwards with loss of pandemic, like extra SNAP benefits, and a return of stricter Medicaid eligibility requirements, and needing to re-enroll, which leads to families losing food and healthcare benefits. And then Rebecca also said, I'm depressed to think there doesn't seem to be an appropriate level of alarm about this and a concerted effort to fight this at the national level. I'm not sure either you, or maybe more so like Sandra, might have to say to that.
Well, I would say for Rebecca, if you don't know now, reach out to your legal aid society or services in your city, and issues and concerns that you can bring to them to see if this is an issue or concern that they're working on, because a lot of them come together. I know in Washington, D.C., a group of them have come together on issues that customers, we call them recipients and applicants, customers, when they're applying, if the application is too difficult, notification, that's a way you can find out what they're doing. And if they're not doing anything, ask them to take it. Maybe this is an issue that they can advocate for. Since they are representing multiple groups of people that are applying for all diverse types of aid.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the film, we can see that that is sort of one of the best ways to try to draw attention to this, and to also solve one's own problem, is to band together with other folks in your neighborhood, in your community, in your, you know, in your building or wherever, in your church or in your house of worship, wherever that is, like, I think we do have a lack of awareness also these days, is sort of what Sandra was calling the iPhone problem. It's like people are just like, I will just scroll along through this, or I'll just binge watch this show and not worry about what's really happening. And the government people, I think, are relying on that, honestly. You know, it has gotten harder to apply for things, and benefits are shrinking. I mean, I'm seeing all the time conversations about like SNAP benefits being reduced. There's certain places, I think Wisconsin might be one of them, where there's something about trying to reduce and make it more difficult to get onto TANF. So I think some of it is a local problem. And so, you know, each state can kind of choose how they want to use the federal funding that they receive for these programs. So as, you know, Ruby and the moms found out in Nevada in particular, you know, George Miller was, you know, really stingy about it and was very like reticent of giving out any support. And so they had to fight for that, even though on the federal level, there was funding. A lot of states have millions and millions of dollars that are specifically reserved for public assistance in all kinds of areas, whether it's food, you know, SNAP or WIC or TANF, but they don't release the funds. So it's on the local level, you can get together with organizations that may already exist, or get your community together and try to make your own, the way the moms in the film did. And then once you have kind of state attention, you can try to make it on a more federal level and other changes. But I would say you can do it and do it better.
Right.
I'm looking, and I know this isn't really a question, but I know a comment, Linda just mentioning there was an article in the Globe today about the mistreatment of children by the state's agency, Department of Children and Families. And I guess as other people might think of questions, kind of like similar to the first one about like groups that support independent filmmakers. I'm not sure if there's any groups that you guys would want to lift up that are doing the work, like anti-poverty or like welfare work that people could like think of supporting, whether it's federally or like independent groups or nonprofits that are worth mentioning.
Totally. We have a lot of partners that we're working with. Some of them are local and some of them are more national. But many of the ones that are national also have local chapters. I would say, you know, there is a National Welfare Rights Union, which still exists. It's sort of like the continuation of the National Welfare Rights Organization. And so they have chapters in different cities. And so in different cities, they're dealing with different problems. So like, you know, near Flint, they're still dealing with water, which is crazy to me. And in other places, they're dealing with heat or lack of clothing or affordable housing. And so depending on where you are, the issues may be slightly different, but yeah, the National Welfare Rights Union, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, they're great. I'm going to get in trouble for not naming everybody, but we have a lot of different people. There's like the Culinary Workers Union that I mentioned. They have kind of a national union of workers as well. And in DC, we were working with Empower DC, right? They're great. There are a lot. If you go to our website, sorry, it's not meant to be a shameless plug, but if you go to stormingcaesarspalace.com, we have a list of our partners there, and ways that you can get involved as well. You can always have a watch party for friends or family and community, and that way you guys can talk about issues. We're creating a guide, a discussion guide, so people can try to kind of change the narrative and the kind of ways in which we can do that. So we have lots of resources. If you check out our website, that might be a place to also find partners.
Yeah, like what other groups, like I don't know, Sandra, if there's anything to add on to Hazel's plugs.
No, that's the start, because you know, you'll plug in one and then you got to be careful because the others might feel that you didn't recognize us. So I just say whatever you're interested in, you can find out in your community. You know, like I always say, Google the groups, Google what your interest is, and get involved. And don't leave out also lobbying. I just said, you know, with these groups, you got to learn, You got to go to your city, state, federal representatives and let them know what your concerns are, what policies need to be changed, or what needs to be added, or what your ideas. So it's start finding what group or organizations you're interested in. And if it's just your community, we started here talking about a new community center. I lobbied, I organized my community. We came together, we went before our city council, and we were able to get $16.9 million to rebuild a new community center. We got a library that we never had added. So the power is in the people. A lot of people who worked with us did not believe they could do it, but we did it, and we got it done.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much. And then we have another question from Kathleen. First, they're mentioning that this book by Matthew Desmond, Poverty by America, is going to be out tomorrow. And they were, as like, I guess, a plugging to that, they were asking you both, like, what do you see as a way to solve homelessness and the crisis and the need for more deeply affordable housing with so many, the numbers of people experiencing homelessness, like unhoused people going up in America?
Well, I would say there was an incident in Washington, D.C. where homeless people were victimized, and in my community, I made sure that I was interviewed by the news, and I said that it is important that we need to create a commission or a group that can discuss wraparound services for the homeless, mental health issues, because I mean, something that's out of the box, not the same old, but something different. And we need to include people that are right there, the homeless. We don't need, the PhD, we don't need all the PhDs and all that. We need people who are actually out there on the forefronts that are fighting this, that's dealing with the mental health. And it's really bad. The homelessness, it's wrapped up in a lot of issues, and we're finding a lot of mental health issues. And people are not homeless because they want to be out on the streets. So that was one of my recommendations. There needs to be a commission or a group that the city government can pull together and really hear and something different they can approach as opposed to the same old.
Right.
Yeah, Matthew Desmond's his book and his previous book about eviction was also very incredibly well researched and really intense, because it shows how there's so many systemic issues that are all kind of connected, so that it's really difficult for people to get out of one situation and make their way out. And I think it's so hard because we have this sort of bootstrap mentality, or at least certain politicians put that out there without having bootstraps, as Ruby says in the film, like, what are you supposed to do? And I think it is sort of trying to come up with solutions from within the community too. I think the same thing that Sandra is saying makes a lot of sense, like trying to talk to homeless folks and figure out what happened to them, what went wrong, and where can things be different, like what, had they had this at this particular moment, maybe they wouldn't have lost their home. And if they had this, then all of their stuff wouldn't have been repossessed, or it's part of that whole thing that there's so many Americans are really just one accident, one life change, a medical emergency, a divorce away from poverty. And so really just trying to get involved in every way, so that, heaven forbid, it becomes your turn, there is a sufficient safety net for you, because we're all so close, and people are getting laid off left and right. And I think, I'm not a policy person, but I do feel like, in the film, the moms are suggesting having an adequate income. If there was some sort of income floor that people can't fall through, that would help. And there's a lot of pilots that are happening in cities across the country, which show that $500 a month, $1,000 a month going to people. It's not they're going to sit around and buy steaks or whatever, crazy politicians are trying to say. They will actually then be able to get a babysitter so they can take that night class that they wanted to take, so they can start to have, maybe a better paying job. I think, there's all sorts of things I could go on and on. So, but yeah, we definitely need to make some changes.
And I know like we're running out of time, but there's just like two last comments that I wanted to mention. I know that Sue had said one, this really stood out to me. It was like, talk about cooking with Vaseline. I haven't heard of that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if Sandra.
Well, if you don't have anything to fry that cornbread with, my mother did what she felt was the best thing she could do, under the circumstances. And, for me to even hear that, it was just sad in itself. And that she had to go to that extreme.
All right. And then the last one, another one from Linda, was, I thought it was great that this film talked about different welfare organizations working together nationwide, and the fact that you don't see that with a lot of nonprofits, and they were really heartened to see that. Just another comment to you guys.
Yeah, I think that's important. Oh, sorry, Sandra.
No, that's why I was saying it's important that this movie, this documentary, it helps to get people involved, to come together, to work on issues. And every organization, they could be working on children issues, and it could be 5 of them, and all of them can come together to work on issues that they can touch upon. They can bring their communities, their support, their resources together. And this is what we've lost. We've lost that. And that's why I said I went back to grassroots, speaking to people, talking to people. And so nonprofits are thinking, well, we're competing with the dollars and all that, but people really need to come together and share their resources to help be more effective.
Yeah, I think it's also important to see, like, one of the reasons it was so important for me to show it in the film was that, Ruby's not alone, right? She's not the only, incredible woman in Las Vegas. There were not only other moms that were working with her, and she'd be the first to say she couldn't do it alone, that everyone worked together. But then there was Ruby Duncan's in cities across the country, right? There was, Johnny Tillman in Watts, there was Beulah Saunders in New York, and so many nameless, named and people I couldn't include in the film, all over the country. And so I think if we remember, sort of to Sandra's point, we're not alone. And if we, we can, now that we do have the internet and we do have, means of connecting, that we can, and we probably should, if we can, use social media to that sort of positive end, to be able to really come together. So you don't have to feel kind of isolated in your own place, like, what do I do? And feel despair that you're on your own, because really there are so many other people out there who are probably going through something very similar, and they might be in your town, but they also might be in another one, and there may be another organization that you can reach out to there. And having that national solidarity really does help make the movement bigger and bigger. I always say, if the 37 million people who are living in poverty in the US right now, and the 13 million children actually all showed up on the White House steps on one day, they would have to do something about it. But because we're separated by race or gender or class or all these other things, people kind of are like, well, I'm not that person, or that's not my problem, or I don't like them, or whatever it is. But if we get over all of that and we realize that we basically just need to be able to live, and like that's a human right, and then in the wealthiest country in the world, the fact that there is poverty here is a policy choice. Our politicians have decided that for us, and we can and we should get out there and try to do something about it.
And I like to add to that, if you're in a city, you have an issue, there's concerns or an area of interest, reach out to all the different organizations and see how you can all come together, have a meeting, a conference where you talk, a round table. They call it the round table. Get that round table. You can initiate the round table. It doesn't have to be anybody. I mean, anybody can initiate the round table in the community. Bring the groups together, pound out what are the most important factors that we need to focus on, and then see how you can go from there, building, using the resources you all have and lobbying for issues. And that's what we're missing now. We got to reach out to other organizations and pull the resources and the support. And that is why Storming Caesar's Palace, I said again, is a movement within itself, because it will help to energize and motivate and uplift people to come together. These poor women can do that, we can do it. And that is what this is all about. Getting people up, put the iPhone down. When you're at that round table, get busy and work on legislation, policies, or issues that can impact your community, your city, your state, and nationwide.
That's such a great note to end on. Unfortunately, we're not able to take any more questions. We've run a little bit over time, but thank you both so much. Sandra and Hazel, for spending your time and not only with us today, but just the continuous work that you're doing in your respective fields. I took up so much away from this, and I'm sure everyone here did too. And just as a reminder to everyone that Storming Caesar's Palace is going to premiere tonight at 10 p.m. So be sure to tell your mom, your friends, your granny, everyone you know, and also go to stormingcaesarspalace.com for the resources that were mentioned today. That's it for today, and take care. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having us.